At exactly 3:03 a.m. on August 8, 1963, a train carrying millions in cash sliced through the quiet darkness between Glasgow and London. Within half an hour, that money would vanish into the English countryside. By sunrise, Britain would wake up to headlines announcing a crime so bold, so carefully engineered that it would redefine what was thought possible. Inside one of the mail coaches, a postal worker sorted letters under dim lighting as the train slowed to an unexpected halt. Stops weren't unusual. Signal changes happened. Mechanical delays were part of railway life. But this pause felt longer, stranger. When he opened the door to check the carriage ahead, he was met with a chilling sight. Empty track. The high-value coach that had been directly in front of him was gone. That missing carriage wasn't carrying ordinary parcels. It was loaded with over £2.6 million in used banknotes. Being transferred south after a Scottish bank holiday had created an unusually large backlog of cash shipments. It was quite literally a moving vault. The robbery that unfolded that morning would become known as the Great Train Robbery, one of the most audacious crimes in British history. Behind the plan stood Bruce Reynolds, a man who believed crime could be elevated into an art form. Born in London in 1931, Reynolds experienced instability from an early age. By his teens, he was already experimenting with petty theft. Prison sentences followed, but instead of discouraging him, they sharpened his ambition. He studied experienced criminals, absorbed their methods, and began dreaming bigger. By the early 1960s, Reynolds had built a trusted circle of associates known informally as the Southwest Gang. Their operations had grown steadily in scale, including a lucrative airport robbery that strengthened Reynolds' reputation for precision planning. Yet he craved something extraordinary, a crime that would cement his name in history. The opportunity arrived through an insider source who revealed crucial details about a Royal Mail train scheduled for August 8th. Because of the bank holiday in Scotland, that train would be carrying far more cash than usual. Even more importantly, the high-value coach assigned that night lacked the modern security upgrades that had been recommended but not fully implemented across the railway system. Reynolds assembled a team of 15 men. They weren't random street criminals. Among them were drivers, logistics coordinators, and individuals familiar with railway systems. They acquired a remote property in Buckinghamshire, Leatherslade Farm, to use as a temporary base. Vehicles were secured and repainted to resemble military transports. Communication systems were arranged. Each man had a clearly defined role. In Reynolds' mind, this was not just a robbery. It was a masterpiece in timing and coordination. As the train approached Sears Crossing shortly after 3 a.m., members of the gang executed the first step of their plan. They tampered with the railway signals, covering the green light and activating a red one using a battery setup. The driver, seeing the stop signal, applied the brakes. Attempts to contact nearby stations failed. Communication lines had been cut. Within moments, masked men boarded the locomotive. The driver was overpowered, and the high-value carriage was uncoupled from the rest of the train. The gang's intention was to move only the engine and the money coach half a mile down the track to Bridego Bridge, where unloading could happen swiftly and discreetly. But even the best plans can wobble under pressure. The gang had recruited a retired train driver to move the detached section, only to discover he was unfamiliar with the locomotive's braking system. In a tense moment, they forced the injured original driver to operate the controls instead. Against the odds, the carriage reached Bridego Bridge. There, under moonlight, the robbers formed a human chain. Mailbags filled with used banknotes, mostly small denominations, were passed rapidly into an army-style truck. Every second counted. The entire operation was timed meticulously. Within approximately 30 minutes, they had loaded 120 of the 128 available mailbags. 8 bags were left behind. They could not risk delay. The train staff were restrained but largely unharmed, though one driver suffered head injuries during the confrontation. The gang departed before police roadblocks could be effectively established. Back at Leatherslade Farm, adrenaline gave way to disbelief. The final count revealed just under £2.6 million, an enormous sum in 1963. Adjusted for modern value, it would equate to tens of millions of pounds today. Each principal participant stood to receive roughly £150,000. For a moment, it appeared they had achieved the impossible. But their greatest vulnerability lay not in the robbery itself but in what followed. As news of the crime spread across Britain, investigators moved quickly. A key clue came from testimony that one of the robbers had instructed railway staff not to contact police for 30 minutes. That detail allowed authorities to calculate a maximum escape radius. The search zone narrowed significantly. A local farmer, aware of a substantial reward offered for information, reported suspicious activity at Leatherslade Farm. When police raided the property, they discovered abandoned evidence everywhere: empty mailbags, burned clothing fragments, vehicles still in disguise, and most damning of all, fingerprints. Hundreds of them. The investigation was handed to the Flying Squad, a specialized branch of detectives led by the determined and methodical Tommy Butler. Known for his relentless work ethic, Butler pursued suspects with unwavering focus. Arrests began swiftly. Some gang members made costly mistakes, spending conspicuously, attempting to rent properties with large amounts of cash, or failing to cover their tracks properly. Fingerprint matches sealed their fate. By early 1964, the majority of the robbers had been captured and sentenced to lengthy prison terms, some receiving up to 30 years. Yet two figures would keep the legend alive. Reynolds managed to evade capture for several years. He altered his appearance and fled abroad, moving through Belgium and Mexico. At first, life as a fugitive felt glamorous. He spent lavishly on hotels, cars, and fine dining. But fortunes fade quickly without income. By 1968, nearly broke and increasingly isolated, Reynolds returned quietly to London. He was eventually arrested and sentenced to 25 years, serving a decade before release. The second fugitive, however, would become a cultural phenomenon. Ronnie Biggs had been a relatively minor participant in the robbery, tasked primarily with recruiting the substitute train driver. After his conviction, he orchestrated a dramatic prison escape involving a rope ladder and outside accomplices. He fled first to Paris for plastic surgery, then to Australia, and eventually to Brazil, a country without an extradition treaty with the United Kingdom at the time. Biggs embraced his status as an outlaw celebrity. He gave interviews, recorded music, and posed for photographers. For decades, he remained beyond the reach of British law, surviving through media deals and public appearances. In 2001, after suffering serious health issues, Biggs voluntarily returned to Britain and was imprisoned once more. Years later, he was granted compassionate release. Both Reynolds and Biggs passed away in 2013, their names forever linked to that August morning in 1963. Of the original £2.6 million stolen, only a small fraction was ever recovered. The majority vanished into private hands, overseas accounts, secret investments, or perhaps places no one has yet uncovered. The Great Train Robbery reshaped public perception of organized crime in Britain. It exposed security weaknesses, elevated certain criminals to near-mythical status, and demonstrated how meticulous planning could briefly outmaneuver even the most established institutions. Yet more than 60 years later, one question still lingers in the shadows of railway history. If most of the money was never found, where did it truly end up? And is it possible that somewhere, quietly resting in forgotten safes or buried caches, a piece of Britain's most famous stolen fortune still waits to be discovered?